Yeah, so this is something that inspires or motivates me is to be around people that are masters of their craft. And I thought of a couple examples, and this really has nothing to do with business. The first one is Chug Wilson. This guy grew up on the outskirts of Iowa City, and he had an apple orchard, and he was beyond his time in terms of like breeding different varieties of apple trees. He was all in on growing apples, and he had a beautiful farm. And he was really before his time in terms of like being organic and using natural fertilizer. And the guy he loved apples, and he loved apple trees, and he loved eating apples, and he was awesome. And when you talk to him and he talk about like the different varieties that he was developing, you could see that he was like totally jacked up and excited about what he was doing. And just being around that, it rubs off on you. I aspire to be a master of some sort of craft at some point in my life. And so, he's example number one. Example number two, I met a chainsaw carver in Festus, Missouri, and that's what he does for a living. And the guy's an absolute artist, and he's all in. He gets totally excited about what he's doing. He told me, he's like, I don't really like doing boring designs, like just carving your last name into a log. Like, I like doing really epic stuff. And it was just infectious talking to him. Like, he was so excited about what he was doing, and I absolutely love that. So we talk a lot about on the podcast about surrounding yourself with like-minded individuals. And, I think that's really helpful in business, to surround yourself with other business people. However, just being around like a fellow master of whatever, I think that is also helpful and inspiring and motivating. So, Ken, what about you? Do you like when you think of people that are masters of their craft? What do you think about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a quick story to share. This was about probably 5-7 years ago. I had a pair of boots that I bought, and I'm pretty cheap. I don't usually spend more than $50 on a pair of shoes. And I bought this pair of boots, and it was nearly $200 for this boots. And so I wore them for about a year, and then one of the soles started coming off, and I was like, damn. And so I was talking to my dad, and he's like, "Whoa, there's a shoe cobbler like in this one plaza by the house." I'm like, "Oh, really? What's that?" And he's like, "That's someone that makes shoes." And I'm like, "Okay." In this day and age, you don't really think of people making shoes, actual shoes. So I'm like, that's worth a shot. I don't want to just toss these boots. So I go over there, go in, walk through the door, and it looks like it's a blast from the past of like the 40s or 50s. Everything inside there was like really old. So I go in there, and the guy greets me, comes up, and I can't remember his name, but he was probably in his late 50s, early 60s. It was a Russian guy, probably no more than 5'6". And I showed him my boots. He had very little English, and I had very little Russian to give him. So he looks at them. I show him that it's broken, and he's like, kind of shakes his head, and he's like, yeah. And then he just writes me this old receipt, and he hands it to me and says 1 week. I'm like, okay. So I go back a week later, and I go in there, and he didn't hear me, and so he was just working away. He had all these different kinds of machines. He's like sculpting leather, doing all this stuff, and I'm like, holy crap. Comes over, and there was a little girl that was in there, and so she comes over, and I hand her the receipt, and she looks around, she gets the shoes, and I said, how long has he been doing this? And it's like that was her grandfather, and he had been doing that since he was 5. His father taught him in Russia, and I'm like, this is someone who has perfected a craft. And so I picked up my boots and I looked at them, and I couldn't tell one from the other. One of them had half the sole ripped off, and I looked inside there, and he had even put new inserts in the bottom. I'm like this is insane. Like someone to take that and just repair it. So when I think of someone that's a master of their craft, they practice it every single day for a really long time. I think, what does it take? 10,000 hours, and you're considered an expert in something. And so, like you mentioned earlier, surround yourself with like-minded people to learn from, and then just show up every day. Practice your craft, sharpen the sword every day. You know, it gets a little bit sharper every single day over a long period of time.